Dedrick D. Gobert, who was best distinguished for his role as Dookie, a character who was never without his pacifier in a hit 1991 movie, Boyz in the Hood, had the potential to achieve success in the entertainment industry, just like his co-stars. However, his life was tragically cut short before he got the chance to realize his true potential. I'm gonna take a deep dive into the life of Dedrick, and I'll be discussing the events leading up to his demise, as well as the aftermath of his death. Dedrick D. Gobert was born on November 25, 1971, in Louisiana, USA. Gobert grew up with his mother, Carolyn Gobert, and she would describe her son as a friendly person who liked to joke with people and make them laugh. Being the character that he was, it allowed him to gain acting opportunities, such as starring in several commercials, and would later star in 3 movies that were written and directed by the late John Singleton. Now, Gobert met Singleton when he worked at a post office and had to transport mail from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And so the two struck up a friendship, and when Singleton had finished writing a script for Boyz in the Hood, he offered Gobert the role of Dookie, who was the childhood friend and member of Doughboy's Crips gang. As we all know, Gobert's portrayal of Dookie is best famous for his iconic pacifier, which was used by the character throughout the film. Fun fact, Gobert actually sucked on pacifiers in real life to quit his smoking addiction. Singleton thought it was so cool that he wanted to use it in the movie. While editing Boyz in the Hood, Singleton began writing the draft script for a film he named Poetic Justice, and he once again used some of the same actors from his previous film, and that included Gobert. Gobert was cast in the small role of Lloyd. With just 2 acting credits under his belt, Gobert would then be cast in his last role in Singleton's 1995 film, Higher Learning. Gobert played the role of Fudge's homie, but sadly, he would never be able to see the finished movie, which was released almost a year after his untimely demise. In the early morning hours of November 19, 1994, a group of friends including Dedrick Gobert, Ignacio Hernandez, Jenny Hayan, Herman Flores, and Christine Gileres attended an illegal weekend drag race in the area of Etiwanda Avenue in Mira Loma. At that time, both Gobert and Hernandez participated in the races. During a race that Hernandez was a part of, another car pulled in front of him, and so he had to brake in order to avoid a collision. Hernandez got out and started arguing with the driver of the car that had cut him off, and so a fight ensued. There were around 10 Asians who surrounded Hernandez and started fighting him. But then they heard sirens and everyone quickly dispersed. Hernandez got into his Honda Del Sol with Hayan, and Gobert got into his Volkswagen Rabbit with Gileres and Flores and drove off and parked on the street in front of a pizza parlor in Etiwanda Avenue. They became separated from their other friends, so they got out to see if they could find them. However, they came across the same Asian group that was fighting with Hernandez. The Asian group started yelling at him, and his friends yelled back at the Asian group as well. During the argument, one of the Asian members pulled out a silver chrome handgun and pointed it at Hayan. It was testified by Gileres that the gun was pointed towards Hayan's forehead, but Hayan testified that it was pointed at her group generally. Hyan yelled at the gunman, and an older Asian member said something to him that made the gunman put down the gun, and then the Asian group walked away. On the same night, Sunny Nraka and a couple of members and associates of his criminal street gang, the Acro Boyz Crazy, or ABC for short, also attended the races. The gang included Lester Maliwat, Eric Garcia, and Roger Boring. The ABC gang started in Orange County between 1988 and 1989. The gang had hand signs, connections with the Bloods, and has a turf orientation, which is where they operate under a loose leadership with ill-defined roles and a focus on loyalty and turf protections. The gang gathered at Bourne's home earlier that evening and drove several of their cars to the races. Nraka rode with Maliwat, while also carrying a snub-nosed revolver. The gang parked in and around the pizza parlor on Edawanda Avenue and hanged around the area. And that's when Boring noticed Gobert and Hyan walking back and forth and discussing about the Asian group from earlier. Galeras, Hyan, Gobert, Hernandez, and Flores had assumed that their other friends left, so they decided to leave too. Before they left, Gobert got into his Volkswagen and drove up and down Edawanda, and while doing so, Maliwat testified that Gobert was looking at their gang in a wrong way before pulling back in behind Hernandez's car. Gobert was informed that the ABC gang, who was dressed in red, was looking at his friends while saying "blood, blood, blood" in their conversations. This angered Gobert, so he went to approach the ABC gang. According to Galeras' testimony, Gobert grew up in Los Angeles and did not like red, and even explained how he wore blue and had friends who were Crips. So, Gobert approached them and said, "What's up, cuz? Fuck Bloods, fuck slobs," and claimed to be a Mafia Crip member, and even raised his arms and made a Crip gang hand sign. Some of the ABC gang, such as Boring and Maliwat, thought Gobert to be funny because he appeared to be intoxicated because he zigzagged on his feet. Hyan and Galeras both testified that Gobert drank most of a 40-ounce bottle of malt liquor. There were others who were insulted and responded saying, "What's up, blood?" to insult him back. Then there was a point where the ABC gang rushed Gobert and started beating him up, apparently because they saw Gobert reach under his shirt as if he had a gun hidden. However, Galeras testified that she didn't see Gobert with a gun that night. Between 15 and 20 of the ABC gang members hit and kicked Gobert. Galeras, Hernandez, and Hyan yelled, "Stop it, that's enough," and tried to help him. But the beatdown continued with them kicking, hitting, and stomping on Gobert. At that point, Hernandez got on top of Gobert to protect him, but was kicked on the head by Claudio Ortiz, a member of the ABC gang. Galeras got on top of Hernandez, but she then got kicked in the face and ended up stunned on the ground. As the fight was simmering down, shots were fired. Boring, who had started to walk back towards the cars, looked back and saw Nraka grab Hernandez by the head or shoulder, raised his upper body, and shot him. He then stood over Gobert, pointed his gun, and shot him as well. Boring then saw a female approach Nraka from behind and punched or kicked him. Nraka turned around and shot her also. The female turned out to be Hyan. Maliwat also saw Nraka commit the shootings, and when Maliwat ran and got into his car and started to pull out, Nraka got in the car. Maliwat then asked Nraka why he shot the girl, and his response was, "Fuck them, they deserved it." So Maliwat drove away from the scene, and while doing so, Nraka took the expended shells from the revolver and threw them out of the car. they drove back to Boring's home where Nraka lived at that time. Eric Garcia, another member of the ABC gang, had stayed in the car he rode in the whole time, listening to the radio. He was told about the fight, so he got out to see what was happening. He saw his gang, who clearly outnumbered the people that they were beating up, but then he heard 2 to 3 shots and saw people running, so he ran back to his car and drove away. Since Garcia was notified by Hortia that Nraka committed the shootings, he went to confront Nraka on what happened and why he shot the girl. All Nraka said was that maybe they deserved it. Garcia asked Nraka for the gun, which he refused to surrender. But then Nraka asked Garcia to take the gun, which he did. Garcia kept the gun for a few days until Nraka took it back. Back at the scene, officers arrived and found Gobert and Hernandez's deceased bodies. Hayan was alive, lying on the road, and was in and out of consciousness. She had a bullet wound at the side of her neck, and so she was taken to a hospital. The bullet was removed during the surgery, but she remained paralyzed from the neck down, with some movement in her left arm, and only a little bit of movement in her right arm. The bullet, which was a damaged .38 bullet, had marks that were consistent with slippage, which is a distortion in rifling impressions, which suggests that it could have belonged to a revolver or even from a semi-automatic weapon. But forensics did not find any shell casings near the crime scene. Autopsies were conducted on Gobert and Hernandez, and the forensic pathologist found external trauma on both victims, which was consistent with having been received in a fight. Hernandez suffered 2 gunshot wounds. There was a gunshot entrance wound to the left back of his head, above and behind his left ear. The bullet fragmented and some were stuck under the skin at the entrance wound. The other bullet traveled through his brain and was stuck under the skin on the forehead. Since the bullet failed to exit through the skin, it suggests that his head was against a very hard surface, like the ground, when the shot was fired. The second bullet entered through the left backside, through the lower and upper left lung, piercing the heart and right lung, stopping in the muscles of the right front chest. Gobert had a single gunshot wound on the right back of his head, above and behind his left ear, which killed him, and the bullet fragmented and lodged in his brain. Due to a tip from Hortia about the shootings, authorities were able to arrest Nraka on December 12, 1994. He was interviewed by Detective John Schultz, and the interview was tape recorded and played for the jury. In the recording, he denied being involved in the shootings and claimed that he had spent the evening watching movies with his girlfriend and stayed home all night. He then asked for a lawyer. While Detective Schultz prepared paperwork, he turned Nraka over to Detective Eric Speidel for pre-booking processing. From there, Nraka was fingerprinted and photographed and was allowed to call his girlfriend. Nraka then asked when he would get a lawyer, and Detective Speidel explained the charging and arraignment process, such as the appointment of counsel. Nraka then asked if there was a reward offered for info on the shootings, but Detective Speidel was unaware of one. The reason why Nraka asked about a reward was because he thought he was ratted out by someone in exchange for a reward. Nraka then said that on the day of the shootings, it didn't go down the way it was told by detectives, and so he wanted to share his side of the story. Detective Speidel reminded Nraka that he didn't have a lawyer yet and basically told him to wait until he was assigned one. Nraka still wanted to tell his side and said that he didn't want to involve anyone but himself. So, Detective Speidel said that he could set up a tape recording where he can tell his side, but that he couldn't ask him questions unless Nraka was fine with it, which he was. So, Detective Speidel recorded his statement. Nraka began by saying that he in fact did commit the shootings and that he's always carried a gun with him wherever he goes, since his friend was shot in a gang-related incident. Nraka said that he drank alcohol before leaving for the races and was coming down from using speed, which is slang for methamphetamine. He said that he witnessed Gobert drive up fast, like he was upset, took something out of his car, then walked towards Boring while doing something to his belt. To the ABC gang, it appeared that Gobert had a gun, and then Gobert claimed to be a Crip. Nraka assumed that Gobert may have mistaken his group as the same Asian group whom Gobert and his friends were arguing with earlier, because Nraka said that he heard Hyan say to Gobert, "That's not them." Nraka said him and someone else saw Gobert reach in, and so a fight broke out. Nraka said that he intended to pull out his gun and shoot in the air, but he thought he recognized Hernandez from somewhere, so he lifted him up and asked him where he was from. Hernandez just swatted at his hand. Nraka thought that Hernandez was trying to reach for Gobert's gun, so he shot him in the shoulder. Hernandez leaned over, and thinking that he was going to shoot him, Nraka shot him a second time. Gobert said, "Fuck you" to Nraka and pushed Hernandez off him. Nraka thought that Gobert was trying to reach for his gun, so he shot him too. When Hyan attacked Nraka from behind, he raised his gun to scare her, but when Hyan charged at him, he fired, thinking that he was firing over her head. Nraka basically cried self-defense as to why he fired his revolver that night, even though him and his gang far outnumbered their rivals, and they had the upper hand the entire time. Nraka said that he fired a total of 4 shots from his 5-shot revolver, a snub-nosed .38 Special. He told Detective Speidel that he got into Maliwat's car and threw the gun out on the freeway during the ride home. After giving his statement, Nraka even offered to accompany Detective Speidel in an effort to find the gun, but it was never recovered. On March 13, 1998, Sonny Nraka was charged for the murder of Hernandez and Gobert, and the attempted murder of Jenny Hyan. In regards to all 3 charges, it was believed that the crimes were committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in association with a criminal street gang. Nraka pleaded not guilty and denied the allegations. Nraka's jury trial commenced on March 10, 1999, before Judge W. Charles Morgan, and a couple of the ABC gang members testified at the trial. And one of them testified that Nraka did use meth on the night of November 18, 1994, but didn't remember the amount that he used. A Dr. James Rosenberg, a forensic psychiatrist, described meth as a strong stimulant that lasts for 11 hours and that it impairs thinking, judgment, and impulse control. As well, the use of meth may come with auditory and visual hallucinations, paranoia, racing thoughts, confusion, distraction, lack of concentration, and violent outbursts. Dr. Rosenberg testified that Nraka's actions lined up with meth intoxication. When it comes to the blood alcohol levels for Gobert, Hernandez, and Hyan, Gobert's was 0.16 and Hernandez's was 0.14, and Hyan's was 0.11. A toxicologist described symptoms of those levels to include slurred speech, balance, mental impairment, and exaggerated emotional state. When discussing whether or not Gobert possessed a gun during the incident, an eyewitness named Daryl Arquero said that he witnessed a shiny object in Gobert's pants when he lifted his shirt and said that he had a gun. But when he was cross-examined, Arquero confessed that when questioned by officers, he didn't mention seeing anything in Gobert's pants. As well, another eyewitness named John Frick said that Gobert was just grabbing his crotch when he lifted his shirt and did not see anything in his pants. And author Belamide testified that when Gobert was assaulted by the ABC gang and moved across the street, people were leaving the area of the fight and Gobert was on the road, badly injured, and wasn't moving when he was shot. Belamide had met Nraka in the past, but claimed that he didn't see him in the group that jumped Gobert, and also claimed that even though he could see the shooter, he didn't see who exactly was the shooter. Yet, Belamide said that he doesn't recall seeing other members of the ABC gang like Maliwads and Boring, even though they were there, and that he doesn't recall seeing a second person on the ground with Gobert or any girls involved in the fight, even though Hernandez was on the ground and both Galeras and Hayan were present, which demonstrates that he's not really much of a reliable witness for this case. During the trial, there were key individuals who testified about how their lives were forever changed since the shootings. One of them included Hayan, who testified that her spinal cord was severed by the bullet Nraka fired and will have to be in a wheelchair for the rest of her days. She testified that she has had trouble breathing and that she has pain in one arm, which has made it difficult for her to sleep. As well, she made it known that she's completely paralyzed from her chest down. She mentioned how she's unable to care for herself and her younger sister, and how she was scared about the future of her own care, and how gutted she feels about the sacrifices her mother had to make in order to care for her. As well, Hernandez's mother, Carmen Vera, also gave her testimony. She talked about his upbringing, how he played on his high school football team, and was a respectful son who had just been accepted into the mechanical engineering program at the University of Texas. Vera actually went through 3 years of psychiatric care in an attempt to deal with his passing. Her life and the life of Hernandez's younger brother had changed tremendously. Also, during the trial, Nraka's backstory was discussed in detail in order for the jury to empathize with him. Nraka, who was born in the Philippines, was raised by his relatives since infancy to the age of 8. He had a happy childhood and was described as a good and loving child who was treated as a son by those who took him in. At 8 years old, his mom took Nraka and they moved to America. He had a stepdad who was emotionally and physically abusive. Nraka eventually joined the ABC gang and would live with the families of other gang members, and he worked. A cultural mental health expert believed that Nraka had been taken from his environment, felt abandoned, alone, weak, and powerless, and created a need to view himself as important. Basically, when Nraka was accepted into the ABC gang, he made a new reality to deal with his vulnerability, where the gang felt like a family, where in the Filipino culture is the origin of an individual's position and moral and social development. She claimed Nraka's emotional issues were evident during his recorded statement to Detective Spidel, and that she believes that Nraka was really sorry for what transpired. However, the prosecution presented a convincing image of Nraka as a leading, dangerous gangbanger who killed the victims when him and his gang were dishonored. Gobert and Hernandez were semi-conscious on the ground when Nraka walked up to them and shot them, and the prosecutor specifically deemed these killings as executions, not just murders. On May 5, 1999, the jury found Nraka guilty of both murder charges, setting the degree of the murders as first degree, and guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, a lesser included offense of the attempted murder charge. The penalty phase began on May 12, 1999. The penalty phase is a part of a trial where in this case, the jury votes on what penalty or damages to impose, and this is also referred to as a sentencing phase. On May 27, 1999, the jury returned with a verdict of death. Nraka motioned for a new trial and for changes to the verdict, but the trial court denied them on July 23, 1999. After spending 20 years on death row, Nraka received a reprieve, and this was given to 736 inmates who were on death row from then Governor Gavin Newsom, who signed a sweeping order in March 2019, putting an executive moratorium on California's death penalty. But Nraka currently remains on death row. Gobert's death may be looked at as art imitating life, since he starred in roles where he played as a gang member and was taken out by one in real life. For Gobert, it seemed as if the gang member role that he took on didn't end as soon as the credits started rolling. It continued on outside of the spotlight and out of the camera's eye. Gobert was given opportunities to really elevate his life and circumstances, and had the potential to be as big as his co-stars. But sadly, he was unfortunately left behind. Some people may blame the gang life for what it did to Gobert. Others may blame Gobert himself for going back to that lifestyle, even though he was just taken off in Hollywood. Either way, it is sad that his potential will never be fully realized. That is all for now on this case. Let me know what you guys thought about this. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Your support is greatly appreciated. And I will see you next time on Melanin Mysteries.